Be sure to prioritize your mental health while in grad school. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I've been counseling many people over the years now, and I wanted to have a conversation about how to prioritize your mental health while in grad school, because I did talk about prioritizing your mental health while in the workspace and so forth. But I had a commenter that asked me, do you have any advice for prioritizing mental health while in grad school? Curious on the differences between corporate versus academia, the more flexible schedule. And she kind of goes on with that. So one of the things that I will say is grad school is not, it has you performing like it's a job, but the reality is it's not a job. Very few people get a paycheck from grad school. If they do, it's usually not a realistic one. Like if you're working as part of somebody's lab, as working as someone's TA or something like that, it's not usually comparable to what you make in the corporate world. It doesn't usually cover cost of living and things like that. And even if you have to do an internship, which I've had to do several, those usually do not pay, or there's very little pay. Again, it doesn't account for the cost of living. And usually with jobs like that, they're going to try to get as much out of you, get as much bang for the buck as they can, because they're paying you very little money. So what I would say is that when you're going through grad school, you do have to have more of a balance. And I say this as somebody who's working full time, going to school full time, and doing internships and dissertation, all the things, right? But realistically speaking, you need to have more of a balance when you're going to grad school. So if you're doing if you have a job, a full-time job, you're trying to do your internship and you're trying to cover all your cost of living expenses, realistically speaking, you do not need to take a full course load. I'm not an academic advisor. I can only speak to you from my experience of grad school, which wasn't that long ago. You have to make sure that you manage your course load and your academic requirements with your mental health. And so you have to be logical. And I say that you have to be logical because sometimes you could be making decisions based off of emotions or pressure. So that pressure can be coming from the school, because they want you to get the financial aid, right? And so they're benefiting from the money. But also, too, you can be getting pressure from your parents, especially if you're Black or a person of color or immigrant. There is oftentimes a shove from family. Hurry up and get your degree. You just need to have your head in the books. You need to study. What's taking so long? How did you do? So there's all this pressure to hurry up and get all this work done, get an advanced degree. You're only deemed worthy if you go to law school, you're an engineer or you're a doctor. And so, there's a lot of pressure to perform in these degrees and in school from family and things like that. You can also have your own internalized pressure to hurry up and get done and be a perfectionist and say that you've got this, that, and the other degree. So I would say slow down and look at logically, you want to have some sort of quality of life. You want to have time built in for regular and consistent rest and relaxation. You want to have time where you can do your coursework. And so you want to look at each course and really have an understanding of what it entails before you register, because some courses, while they may give you let's say 3 units, they're really more like a 40-hour-a-week job. And so you have to be really realistic about that. And I say that as someone who's taken all her sciences, all her maths and things like that from grad level. And I was up there taking 15 units, organic chemistry, pharmacy chemistry, all these kind of chemistries, all these kind of, maths, biology, all this kind of stuff. And that's absolutely insane, because a lot of those chemistry, biology, and physics, I also took physics courses, they have the class, which is high demanding, high performing, but you also have the lab that kind of accompanies that. And so while it may look like a 3 to 4 hour course, it's really more like a 40-hour a week job. And so you have to plan accordingly. I have a good mix. If you're in school or grad school, so don't be taking a heavy science and math load because really it's going to require you to give up your life. You need to have a mix of other things in there with it, and you need to go at your pace that's balanced for your mental health. Number two, make sure that your mental health is always the priority. When in academia, sometimes you have, sometimes you get into a school that you really wanted to get into, and there's like a bait and switch, meaning that you've went to the school with this great reputation, you were promised this unique experience, and you get in there and it's nothing like what was promised. Teachers can be mean, teachers can be bullies, teachers can actually be downright disrespectful and psychotic. You kind of have to be able to advocate for yourself and be able to sort of stand up, because sometimes teachers can sort of pick and bully on students, and you're not going to really get any support from other academia, unfortunately, especially if they're tenured. I've been told, quite frankly, directly, like, I can't stand up to my peers because you don't go against another tenured faculty. So always be prepared to defend yourself, even if you have to hire legal counsel when going against the school. I always recommend, if you're in school, go to therapy. So prioritize your mental health by going to therapy once a week, checking in with an objective therapist who can also, someone who's also been to grad school, and they can also advise you, right, based on their experience of what's normal and what's not, and what, if they have any concerns for you, so always sort of check in and go with them. If you're like in the middle of the course, your academic year, and you're feeling like, hey, I cannot do this, I am struggling, and I'm not, for whatever reason, you're not making, whether it's like you don't like school, you hate school, or mentally you're just faced with some challenges, or your job is demanding and you have to pay more attention to that because you need the money to eat and pay bills and things like that, then I would, go talk to an advisor and heavily consider, withdrawing or getting an incomplete in your coursework. The sooner you do that, the sooner you come to that realization and you do that, the better. It's better to get that than to fail or, just sort of bottom out or be academically dismissed from school, because you can be academically dismissed for not having your grades up to par. And I've counseled many students, unfortunately, that were kind of on that cusp. And I always tell them, take an incomplete. It's better to have that on your report card or on your transcript than it is to have an F. Because once those points go down, you can't pull them back up. Your GPA points and credits and things, you can't pull them back up as easily, if at all, by the time you graduate. So just try to take an incomplete, get a doctor's note to be excused, work on yourself, and do what you got to do to come back. School also requires, in most graduate programs, for you to do like internships and things like that, which is where you're working for free or you're working for a very low rate of pay. In my experience, when you work an internship, they're trying to squeeze as much out of you, even though they're not paying you for it, and they're trying to work you harder than they work regular employees. Form a boundary there. you were required to get your individual and your group supervision if you have to do that, but also form a boundary like, I'm not doing excessive work. I will do my work, and I need to be allotted a certain amount of time on the internship to be able to do my job, or I'm going to get my school involved, or I'm going to get an outside person involved in this. I hope that helps. Thank you so much for asking.